Hello, this identification is on Robert Smalls, born 1939 through 1915. This is a picture of Robert Smalls at an older age when he was in Congress after the Civil War. Um, the similar picture of this is actually in your textbook. So here we have a drawing of Robert Smalls at a young age. Would be closer to the time of when some of the amazing things that happened during his life began. Um, Smalls had been an African American slave back in the Civil War. And at the time of the Civil War, he worked as a slave and as a with a part-time crew on the docks of a shipyard for the Confederate or the Southern Navy. So actually, he freed himself by stealing one of the Southern Confederate Navy ships in Charleston, South Carolina, and Charleston Harbor. He stole the ship, and what they call in the military commandeering is like a military, a use of a military strategy to steal the ship. So as a slave, he found his freedom by stealing the Confederate ship, along with 8 other slaves who helped him, but he was their leader. So here is a picture of a ship. Some of these kind of ships were used in the Civil War. And here, speaking of the Navy, here's another shot of this is actually one of the first submarines in world history. A very small, extremely dangerous submarine that was used during the Civil War, in which were quite ineffective, and often the crew was lost. But the type of ship that Smalls commandeered, well, I'll show you a picture of. This is the actual drawing of the actual ship that Smalls stole or commandeered. It's a gunboat, and it's the gunboat CSS Planter. And he took the ship at night with the other escaping slaves, and was successful in leaving the harbor. They had dressed in uniforms that he had slowly accumulated, and they dressed in Navy uniforms, and then they left at night, and no one in the towers were expecting any Southern ships. They were all keeping their eye out for Union or for Northern ships. So no one noticed. And it was at night, and he just guided the ship past the lookout points and succeeded in getting away. So Smalls um, succeeded in escaping, and he actually stopped the ship along the way, along the shoreline, picked up some other slaves which he had set up to actually rescue, and they jumped aboard ship too. So he actually took others with him, including his own family who boarded the ship. So he boarded the ship. He actually passed 5 Confederate forts, all of which would have sunk the ship had they realized or noticed that it was a slave piloting the ship. So he arrived at the Yankee northern border, and this was probably the most dangerous part of the voyage because this was a Confederate ship, so the Yankees may have just assumed it was a warship and would have sunk it. But he quickly waved, and all the other of the crew of escaped slaves waved the white flag, which is the symbol of surrender. So he waved the flags furiously, and they realized that it was an escape or of ship. And so the Northern Navy soldiers greeted him very, in a friendly way. And so he came basically as a hero, having having escaped from the South in this really dramatic, almost movie-like fashion. And he talked to the admiral of the Northern Navy at the base and explained what had happened. and he also brought a map of the southern harbors where the Southerners had mines, and gave a tremendous amount of military um, information that would help the Northern Navy throughout the Civil War. So he was a hero, and even was covered in the newspapers. His name became well known at the time. His name is not well known at all today, but that's why in a history class like this, I'm able to reveal this information. So um, Lincoln eventually greeted him and gave him an award, and and actually after this, Lincoln was even more intensely excited about the idea of having other African Americans and the free African Americans join the Navy or the Army, and so that happened, and certainly this encouraged that advancement, and which gave another advantage to the North, having new recruits join. So he became well known, and then, as you know from last class, the Civil War was won, um, in 1865. So after he met with Lincoln and after the war was over, uh, there was freedom, and then there were Smalls decided to go into a political career, and now the end of slavery had come, which we talked about quite a bit so far in the class, and we'll cover a little more today. So after the war, um, Robert Smalls went into politics, and he decided to run for Congress. And obviously, as you know, the South was a Democrat party at a different era than obviously in the 1900s, which we'll get into the changes in the Democrat Party later. But past when we get to the 1900s. But Smalls ran and won easily. He went back to South Carolina as a free man. Slavery had fallen, and Northern troops were defending freedom in the South for a period of time. But because Lincoln was eventually assassinated, that became a problem. But for Smalls, he became very successful, and here he runs for political office, and won multiple terms in Congress, and became a very successful politician in the South. See here, Robert Smalls, U.S. House of Representatives, 1875 to 1879, and 1882 to 1887. And actually, quite a few African Americans won political office after the Civil War. And during that period, we call Reconstruction. And he was very involved in, promoting a free public school system, and other accomplishments. So Smalls, like this plaque says, was born a slave in 1839, and eventually delivered to Union forces, the Confederate gunboat Planter, and then eventually as a freedman, he became very successful in politics until he passed on in 1915.